can you state your name and your profession?
Yes, Jack Thomas, and I am a faculty member at the Medical University of South Carolina in the Physical Therapy Division, and I teach human gross anatomy as well as pathophysiology.
So can you describe anatomy or the importance of it in a few words or sentence?
The importance of anatomy is that that's how we're built, that's how we're put together. The analogy that I always draw is you can't fix the car if you don't know where the carburetor is. So we can't really expect to do much in terms of helping human bodies and being healers of human bodies unless we know something about how the human body is put together.
So how did you get into the study of anatomy?
By interest. I actually can trace my interest all the way back to, I believe, when I was about 4 years old. And when I was 4 years old, my parents bought me a set of Compton's encyclopedias, something you don't see much of today, kind of gone obsolete. And I just happened to one day, I remember after we got this set of encyclopedias, I picked up the A section, I guess just simply because it was the A section and it looked like it was a good place to start. And I somehow just thumbing through it found the anatomy section. And they had all these cutouts and beautiful pictures of people that had been opened up, and it showed all the gastrointestinal tract, it showed the thorax, it showed the heart, the lungs. I was fascinated by that. And I had looked at that so many times, and I think when I was about 12 or 13, my parents did an update and got me a new set of Compton's encyclopedias. And I remember as we were unloading the old Compton set and putting in the new Compton set, that the A section fell out on the floor and it automatically opened up to the anatomy. It had been opened up so many times.
So, do you know anything about the importance of Gray's Anatomy or how it's used? We still use it?
Gray's Anatomy used to be the standard textbook. Gray's Anatomy was really compiled by the author whose name was Henry Gray back in the 19th century, who obviously had a tremendous interest in anatomy. Now Gray's Anatomy has also been redone in a more regional format, and by regional I mean that it considers one part of the body, all the anatomy, like the upper limb, for example, or the lower limb. The original Gray's Anatomy, though, was written systemically, so that it talked about systems. It talked about the muscular system, it talked about the skeletal system, it talked about the nervous system. And that's really not how the body works. The body is integrated, and all of those structures like muscles and bones and nerves are all put together. And so as a result of that, and with the idea that anatomy should be taught regionally, Gray's kind of fell out of favor. Now Gray's has been updated, and it was updated by an author called, whose name was Richard Drake, and it is now in regional form. And a lot of people like it. As a matter of fact, it is a beautiful book. I've got a copy of it here in the office. But it still hasn't quite caught on simply because the vacuum that was created, I think, when the original Gray's, the systemic textbook was discontinued. These other textbooks kind of came in and filled the void, and it's been a little bit hard to let those go, I think.
So do you use Gray's Anatomy to teach your students?
I do not. No, I do not use Gray's Anatomy. Not because I think it's a bad book. I think the way it's written, it has beautiful illustrations in it. It's written regionally. It's just, I think after you get familiar with one particular textbook and you're okay with that, then you tend to start using that pretty much exclusively. As a matter of fact, I don't even use a textbook in anatomy. I've written my own set of notes. Students have those, they go by those. We do use an atlas, which we use in the lab, which is a kind of a guide to show you where to look for different structures, how to find those structures, what those structures look like, at least in a diagrammatic form.
So have you noticed any influence on anatomical texts or Gray's Anatomy in the field of anatomy?
State the question one more time.
Do you know anything about the influence of Gray's Anatomy or other important texts?
I see what you mean. Well, I'm sure it has plenty of influence because that was kind of really one of the first ones, at least of recent now. There was one that was actually written way back in, I believe, the 17th century by an author. His name was Vesalius. But that was done in another age, and I think, when we come forward, when we fast forward a few hundred years, the Gray's Anatomy was written actually with text that we could read. It wasn't written in Latin, for example. It was written in English, and also we had plenty of illustrations to go with that. So I think that's kind of the way that Gray's Anatomy kind of came to the fore. I'm sure it has influenced other textbooks. It had to have. I don't know that I can comment on exactly how, but I think it certainly must have.
That other textbook, the one Latin, you talked about De Corpus Humanificum.
That's right. That's right.
Part of my project.
Yeah.
So, do you have
On the fabric of the human
Yeah.
body was the way it translated into English.
So, do you notice a shortage of cadavers in your class, or do you know of any shortage?
We're very fortunate here, I guess, if you want to put it that way, that we have lots of donors who have signed. In order to donate one's remains, the person, him or herself, has to sign a release form. It can't be a relative. Well, in other words, a relative can't step up and sign that release form. The person, him or herself, has to sign it. Amazingly enough, we are able to keep that inventory pretty high. Not that I'm saying that it's good that people die or anything like that. Please don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But if that's going to be the case, and this is the thing that these folks want to do with their remains, well then certainly we're happy to try to help them with that. We have a good set of donors set up. I'm not in charge of that, so I'm really not one who can make a lot of comments on it. That is handled actually across the street in what we call the Basic Sciences building, where really the facility, our dissection lab, our morgue, all of those are set up over there. And we have someone who is in full-time charge of acquiring donors. And so that would be, if you really wanted to take that subject even further, you would need to talk to that person. So I'm kind of on the outside looking in there. But I can tell you that we at least as far as I know at this particular point, we do not have a shortage.
So, do you know anything about body snatching in past times?
Funny you would ask that, as a matter of fact, because there's a story that there's a couple of people, gentlemen, that lived in the United Kingdom back in the 19th century, whose last names were Burke and Hare. Does that ring a bell?
I think I've read about them.
Burke and Hare found out that they could go out and they could actually kill people and bring their remains into the medical school, and they could actually get paid for this. So they kind of set up a little enterprise, of doing this. Well, they got caught, of course, and one of the two, and I can't remember which one, I'd have to go back and look, one of the two flipped on the other, and in doing so, he was spared an execution, and then the one that he flipped on, got hanged. And they did a little bit more in that sense, in that once he was executed, they actually dissected his body. So that was kind of the coup de grace, I guess we could say, on that little episode.
So, do you have any feelings or opinions on anatomically correct cadavers, or not cadavers, mannequins?
Mannequins, models. Well, I think that they're a good supplement. We use them in teaching all the time. We've got a fairly good set of models over in our anatomy lab across the street. I have some concerns about them replacing the use of actual cadavers. We have actually talked about the feasibility of that, though, simply because of the possibility that we may have a shortage sometime. And also, cadavers are extremely expensive. If we look at the cost of going out to pick up the body once the report comes in that someone has passed away, transporting that person's remains back here and preserving them, storing them, and then having them cremated. then that runs into quite an expense, and it's an expense we have to cover. So that's been kind of one of the things that has, I think, garnered most of the attention, is just the expense of cadavers. But at this particular point, we don't have any plan to convert to, say, the use of models. So for right now, at least at the present, we're using them as supplements. We also use, at least in our teaching, virtual cadavers as well. In other words, dissections and so forth that we can pull up on the computer. And we supplement our course along with those as well.
So how important is knowing about anatomy and doing dissections in a medical education?
Well, again, that kind of goes back to your first question, I think, that you can't fix the car unless you know what the carburetor is and where it's located. We feel that medical education would be totally incomplete without knowledge of anatomy. There are some individuals in education as well as in government who have expressed the opinion that anatomy could be taught in a lot less intense mode, and it would still suffice. And there's been a lot of experimentation with that, but it seems like that, most people tend to come back to the old way of doing it after they've tried the other ways. So we still teach a full anatomy course. It's a very intense course. Pardon me. And it's pretty, we feel, directed toward hopefully giving the students what they need to be clinicians and good practitioners of health.
So how important is having a guide when doing dissections?
Having a what?
A guide or anatomy?
A guide,
Yeah.
you mean like a set of instructions?
Yes,
I think
right.
it's very important. The students never use it. So they just come in and get started. We have to get on to them all the time and say, you know, it's much easier if you put the model airplane together and you use the instructions rather than just doing it by itself. And that generally gets them to use it maybe for that day, and then when they come back for the next day, they kind of start on their own again. To me, personally, it makes much more sense to do it that way and use instructions than it does to just kind of fly by night, so to speak. So I think it's important. And we do have we call it a dissector, which is a set of instructions on how to go about doing different dissections. We have all the students buy one of these.
There's one last question. Do you
Okay.
have any other thoughts on anatomy or anything you want to add, how important it is? Or
Well, again, it's very important. We don't feel that we can produce competent healthcare practitioners, whether they be physicians, whether they be physical therapists, whether they be physician assistants, without that basic knowledge of anatomy. I mean, as I say, how can you fix a car if you don't know what the parts are? You may even learn to some degree how the car works, but if you're going to actually lay hands on, which is what our folks are going to do, then I think they would be sorely in remission if they didn't know what a liver looked like, or if they'd never seen a liver, or if they'd never seen a heart, or if they had never studied a heart and all the different parts of the heart. So I think that's where most of us, the side most of us fall on up here, and is there's no easy path to learning. And it's a hard job. It's a lot of manual labor to go into a laboratory and literally take a human body apart. But the dividends that pays are well worth it. And I think if you would ask that question to our students, they would all tell you the same thing.
so, yeah, that's all of them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Yeah, no problem.